Bam.
This is James Rosebush, and it's the Break It Down show.
Yeah, we're talking about what the heck just happened, these elections here. And Robert is here as well. So let's bring Robert back into the show. So I thought we'd start off.
What are we supposed to say? I beg your pardon.
Well, we're just going to start and move on.
We already told them about you that you're going to be on air, Robert. So you're here.
You did it.
You did it.
I'm sorry, the sound here is terrible, but I'll do my best.
Okay. I guess the place to start this thing is what happened last night from your guys' individual points of view.
Yeah, isn't this interesting? It's sort of what happened. It's almost as if it could be its own film, and there are going to be a lot of films about this because this was more of a hurricane than it was an election, and it represents a lot of things that have been stirring for a long time. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people wanted to make this election all about the person who was running for president or the people who are running for president. That isn't what it was about at all. It was about American culture and about American values and a lot of uncomfortable conversations that go on every day in local communities and in families about the future of our blessed country and its impact in the world and the place that we have. So I believe very strongly, even though the Democrats tried to make it about Trump and they tried to obviously feature him playing the villain role, but it didn't work necessarily because what they forgot about or what they didn't really understand was that because the voter base was really focused on much broader issues that affected them, especially people who have, they can't buy food, they can't buy houses. They're in a very, they see people who've come here illegally being taken care of in, let's say comfortable hotels in New York City and other places like that, and yet they can't find or afford a decent place to live. So those are just a couple of surface issues, but so there's a lot of foment, and I think that's what we saw happen last night more than actually an election outcome. So I think it's going to be parsed, it's going to be discussed, it's going to be written about in books, not just in analysis in the New York Times and other media networks. It's going to be talked about for a long time, and I think that the value in it is really dissecting it and looking at it and saying what really happened here. One of my very favorite sayings that I applied to my own life, and the president that I worked for always said this, he always asked the question, what is really going on? And this wasn't just another election. This was something that's going to be a sustained migration of who's voting for whom, who is involved in what platforms, what do people feel? And by the way, are people being listened to in terms of what their interests are and what their problems are and what their challenges are? And I think you would have found a lot of people, a majority of people voting yesterday and feeling that they had been disenfranchised and that their country was not the country that they wanted it to be. And they were also felt, I think, stung by the challenges of just life today, employment, living, all of these different things. And I think that was probably lost on people who think of presidential or other elections, whether it's local, whether it's your local mayor or whatever. They want to know that the people that they're going to vote for hear them. Yeah. Can you hear me? Remember that famous thing? I guess it was when 43 went to after 9/11. But yes, we can hear you. Well, that's what democracy is supposed to be about. Is the people that you represent you and that you vote for, you want them to hear you. And it isn't solving the problem of high grocery prices by saying, oh, we're going to establish a we're going to establish a new department in the government, and it's going to force companies who create food or sell food to be limited in what they can charge. Now, we've been down that avenue before. And it absolutely does not work. It's a complete failure. And so why would we want, so when the public hears that, if they even remember that, and this was Nixon who did this, and there was another president who attempted as well. That's not a solution for people who go to the grocery store and the bread, to get a loaf of bread is $5.50. It's absolutely completely out of proportion to the way people have been living. And they want to see that their interests and their concerns are being addressed. And I think that's what this election was all about. They used this man who was, he was representing a lot of the angst of a lot of people. And I'm not saying that he isn't capable, but I'm saying that they featured him as the target. But that was a big mistake. It was a big mistake. And I'll say one other thing about it, and I'll shut up and let my dear friend and neighbor here speak. But I think that the other mistake that the Democratic Party made was to try to villainize Trump by putting him in all these court cases, and this is going to win the election for us, because look at Trump. He's sitting in a courtroom in New York City, and all the bad things that he's done. I'm not saying anything about the disposition of a lawsuit. I am saying the extraordinary amount of I think emphasis that they placed on this as a tool to win the day against Trump. And when I even think of that, what is this going on in our country? Sure, if people break the law, obviously they need to go through the court system. But this was just a series of patent salvos to try to take this guy out. So I just want to say that also was another technique on the opposing party that did not work. That did not work at all. And it did not, sometimes it's like when you're a kid or something and you want to get something for your parents or whatever. And you talk about your brother or your sister and like, well, why don't you give me more money? They're no good. They made this mistake or whatever. It just has a backlash. And I think that was another feature in addition to those things that I just mentioned about American people not being heard.
Yeah. Robert, welcome to the show. What happened yesterday?
Well, I've just heard one point of view from my good friend and neighbor across the street. And I won't ask who he supported for president. He can say that himself. I supported the Democratic candidate. I just regretted we had this particular Democratic candidate. I think in terms of sheer election technique terms, our first problem was that we have a sitting president of the United States who stayed much too long. Bob Woodward, in his book War, indicates he knew this quite some time ago, but he wanted to sell a book. So instead of coming around and telling people about it, he kept quiet. So he's a minor villain of the piece, but hey, people want to make money, and he made money before, and there you go. That's point number one. So Biden should have gotten out a lot earlier. And when he got out, he should not have anointed a candidate rather than let us have a real process. I think a lot of people were annoyed by that. And in the Democratic Party, as well as elsewhere, you can build up a candidate. I've experienced now 8 presidential campaigns that I've been in at a senior level. You can do it pretty quickly. And Biden not only waited too long, but then he gave us a candidate who I frankly don't think was the best. I had 3 or 4 other people who I would think best. Okay, fine. She recovered a lot of things, but I don't think she was a very distinguished candidate. I don't think she was able to articulate positions to which a lot of people could relate. Now, it's kind of sidebar because my central point to start with, this was not a blowout election. Listening to Jim, you'd think that this was Ronald Reagan when he won was 60%, or LBJ when he won was 60%. It didn't happen. This Kamala Harris still got, and all the votes aren't in, well over 67 million Americans wanted her to be president. Now, it may be that 71 million, that's true, wanted the Republican candidate, whose name happened to be Donald Trump, to be the president, and that's fine. That's a ballgame. But this was what Jim was just saying, which was a kind of a blanket indictment about Americans aren't being heard from. I think that, frankly, in my criticism of the campaign it went on, was that there was not enough attention paid, beginning with Biden, and then Kamala Harris had a difficulty of separating herself from the sitting president. If you look back, incidentally, the number of vice presidents who have immediately succeeded to the presidency of the same party is extremely rare. George H.W. Bush was a very rare avis in succeeding Reagan, and that was partly because he had an absolute klutz as an opponent who was, I'm not sure anybody remembers his name. He was governor of Massachusetts, I think, at the time, and during his acceptance speech at the convention, even gave us a little passage in Greek, which you don't ever do. Reagan, I remember, used to speak a foreign language occasionally, and he always managed to mispronounce things because he understood the American people want a solid American. Reagan was a great campaigner. Kamala Harris was not a great campaigner, but 67 million people still voted for her. Now, I would put this down to a number of things. One was, and I'm not necessarily in particular order, one was inflation. Now, the fact is, inflation has come way down, but the price at the grocery store is up because it's already hardwired in the prices you pay at the pump and in particular at the grocery store. I argued at some point that Biden should have called in the various people in the supply chain on that and say, you know, you got to get back, worry less about your profits and more about your country and the people who are your customer. He wouldn't do it because he didn't have the kind of thing. Lyndon Johnson did that once with a steel strike, and he called in everybody from the thing, put them in the cabinet room, said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to lock the door. And when you reach a decision, knock on the door and I'll open it. And across the hall is a toilet and things to eat and drink. Well, Biden wouldn't do a thing like that. So that's another one. The big issue, I think, which Jim has already touched upon, and I think very effectively touched upon, not just touched upon, but a very important issue, is another I after inflation called immigration. We know inside that there was a compromise worked out with the Congress and ready to go to be passed on a bipartisan basis. And Trump went out and told his people, don't be for that because I need a campaign on it. Okay, have I just lost something? You didn't lose me.
No, you're good. You're good.
I can't see anything anymore, but I'll just take it for granted that you can see and hear me.
We can.
Biden should have closed the border. He had enough executive authority to do it, but he wouldn't do it, in part because maybe there was a consistency interest there. But I think, frankly, it would have worked if he had indeed just closed the border. Incidentally, as I already mentioned about the problem of being a vice president trying to succeed a president, as has been pointed out, if Kamala had tried to separate herself more than she did from the president, everybody in the White House would have started leaking, people loyal to the president, saying, oh, she wasn't involved in this particular thing, not involved in that. So she was a dumb vice president. Well, everybody knows that presidents make decisions and vice presidents don't. They just don't, ever. There's not a single vice president who's ever made it because that's not their job. Vice presidents have two jobs other than not looking stupid, is cast a deciding vote in the Senate and live long enough and be healthy enough in case the president dies or resigns, as Nixon did. They have no other kind of thing. So it's a tough thing to go with. Other things besides that was identity politics. Okay, I think a major factor, and we don't know yet, and maybe the exit polls at some point will tell us, or maybe people won't be prepared to say. Back in 1968, Richard Nixon made a big deal out of having a quote silent majority, by which he meant racist, right? But and there are a lot of people now, despite the fact that Hillary ran for president before, and there are an awful lot of women now in politics. A lot of women are finally coming into their own, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of people who said, I'm still not willing to have a woman as president, and not a woman of color who may or may not have really been black. A lot of blacks, I think, didn't really recognize they were black. And also somebody who's partly from the subcontinent. So I suspect there was an identity politics then. And there was also, as has been pointed out, a number of identity issues in regard to gender and things that were going on with the so-called woke community, which you didn't hear anything about from the candidates this year, at least on the Democratic side. And then in just one particular issue, which was for Michigan, which was the issue of Israel. And Kamala, at some point right at the end, tried to recognize there was a certain part of the voting public who didn't like the open-ended support for Israel in doing what it's doing, and the fact that the United States is a co-belligerent. Of course, Trump, I think, has made a lot about, I went for 4 years, I didn't have any wars, and Biden was involved in 2, both of which, of course, got set up by the circumstances in the region, but also by presidents of the United States. Trump was just as guilty as Biden was in both places in Ukraine and in the Middle East in helping to set up a war. I'll stop at that point, but and see if I can't get my video back on if it'll
okay,
work.
I'm gonna slide you over and we'll talk to James while you work on your tech stuff. James, I want to ask you, when you run a campaign and you demonize someone, calling them Hitler, saying democracy is going to be over, and when that person wins, what are you left with? I mean, how do you redeem yourself, especially if they're not Hitler, and if they don't want to just throw opponents in jail and use the army against, when these things don't occur, that attacks credibility. Now, if it does, then okay, then it's real. But if it's not, what happens?
Are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Can you give me the gist of that again?
I was just asking, when you run a campaign, when you're contrary to Donald Trump and you say he's Hitler, you say he's going to use the military to attack Americans and it's an attack on democracy, and then he wins.
Okay.
If he doesn't do these things, what do you do? What are you left with? It's a very to me, it seems to be a problematic approach to running something campaign wise. I mean, look, if he is a bad person and he does show these cards, then okay, yeah, he tricked all these people. But if he doesn't, that's the bigger problem. So James, I guess, take that on how you will.
Well, isn't that the problem with rhetoric today? There's no cost associated with saying something extremely damaging and judgmental and patently wrong about another person today. This is part of our, according to a lot of people, and I'm certainly tempted to agree with them, our cultural problems today. And people are not, I think, our digital greatness and our capacity to use digital tools to communicate with each other has had also negative aspects to it. And that is basically you can say anything that you want. And I'm sure both of you have been targeted as well. And I don't like it, but people can go on my Insta site. They can go on my LinkedIn site, and they can say whatever they want. Now, it's not the stakes aren't as high with me. I'm not running for president, but on the other hand, people can say without consequence things about people that are just have lost their value. So when you throw something like that out at whether it's a candidate or a next door neighbor, which I've also encountered, people say things that we used to call harmful. And I think in the case of the president that I worked for, he was called a lot of things, but he was, they called him, among many things. He was a person who did not, he did not fall for people who were trying to discredit him, or there were many things. If you remember about Reagan, one of the big one was that how could you trust Reagan was a cowboy, and how could you trust him with the black box, for example? How that was a big play on Reagan, is that he was going to be a person who could, because he would have the numbers in the black box to be able to start a war. Well, knowing Reagan as well as I came to know, he was as far from that kind of person, illogical and irresponsible, than you could ever imagine. But so these are all, political campaigns. This isn't anything new, except for the extreme of calling people names that you think are going to gain votes for you because they are extreme. And I think people are really, I think generally, it isn't just the American people. I think people everywhere, reasonable humans, are really, number one, they're really tired of this. And second of all, they're unhappy about it. Why isn't, and there's always all this talk about unifying and all that sort of thing. Well, politics has always been a game that is far from unifying outcomes or effects while you're debating. So we had pistols in the in the Senate and in the House, in earlier generations, that sort of thing. So it isn't anything new about politics. We had also newspaper editors that would say all kinds of things about candidates and other because people, they want to win, so they're desperate to win, and they want to basically tell the constituents or the voters what they think will help them win about their opponent. So I think that's a part of it. But your question is basically, I think, how do you if these things have been said about you and they're extreme and they're not realistic, you have to let it roll. If you're the candidate, you have to let it roll off and practice what one of the million things that Reagan taught me is to be a well, not a found. So if someone is going to say things about you that you don't like or you don't want to hear repeated, you just let it go. You don't respond, because that's an affirmation. And you see this over and over again. Like if you take the case of the actor, who accidentally shot someone, out in that set in Colorado,
right.
But he would come back and he'd say, I didn't mean to shoot the revolver. Well, if you say that, the way a person hears it, and this again is another lesson, one of the million lessons that Reagan taught me. If you say that, it is heard by the people that I did do it. See what I mean? So that was what Reagan was saying, to be a well and not a found. If you're asked about something, fine, but don't go out there and push more in terms of your own image or who you are or representing yourself. Just let it go. Let it go. Yeah. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
But I want to ask the other side of it, though. If you were on the,
I'm going to have to respond to that.
I'm going to give you a chance in a second, but let me ask this quick follow-up. When you look at the Democratic Party and people like Kamala Harris and other people who aped these lines of saying that he's a Hitler. Yeah, I will. When I'm looking at the other side of this, when you get beat, despite that rhetoric, that's not leadership to me. because now you've created this unreal situation for somebody else. You've damaged a lot of Americans who are sick with worry because of all this stuff that's been fomented. And again, if it happens, okay, fine, that's a different thing. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about if it doesn't happen, that kind of campaign is poisoning people. And so, what do you do about that? How do you run a party and get back from that? There's been a response to what has happened. You guys described that. So, what do you do on the other side of the equation when you do get beat and you are proven wrong by that?
I think all you can do is show your constituency that by your actions and by your communication and what you do for the people that you represent doesn't come close to the label that your political opponents have attached to you. And that's why I think you have to assume that all of these things are going to be said. Yes, they're going to be said about, it isn't just the things they said about Trump, a lot of other people were in this election as well. And so, sure, there's a lot of stuff that's completely untrue. And by the way, we haven't even talked about the intrusion and the very aggressive involvement of the Russians. I want to keep calling them the Soviets, the Russians, and the Chinese in this campaign. So that is very important in terms of what you've just been talking about. And this is creating the image of people that they don't want to they don't want to see successful. So they're going to put out, and they're going to and they did, and they're going to attempt to certainly influence, but they're going to pick up on that. So if people were saying all these things about Trump because it was convenient for him, because for them to do it, speaking of him, because he is, let's say, an extraordinary character. Let's put it that way. In terms of his communication and he would say himself, I mean, he's one of a kind. So he was an opponent, but I think it's very important to be very, very alert to and aware of the fact that in this, the way elections are now, there's tremendous interference from not our friends. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Robert, the question over to you.
No, let me go on for a bit, all right?
Please.
I think Jim did a lot of sugarcoating there.
I like sugarcoat. I like sugar.
No, let me have my say. Okay, you had your say. Let me have my say, okay? Let me have my say. I didn't like Reagan as president, but I'll say this, he was a gentleman. I don't ever recall his disparaging another human being or another group. And yet, every single day, we hear Donald Trump putting people down by groups, by individuals, calling them communists, calling them socialists, calling them whatever he wants to, trashing troops, saying if they're in war and they get in trouble, that's because they're a bunch of losers. He's gone on and on and on. I can't think of a single serious American with kids who would have him for a scoutmaster for their kids, or would let him babysit for their children. I mean, the record out there of his foul mouth, absolute foul mouth, the things he said, which have made him, I think, my judgment and the judgment of a lot of people I know who are good, sensible people who don't have any axe to grind against him, the most disreputable person who has ever had the nomination of a major party in an entire American history. We've never had anybody like this who, with his foul mouth and his disparaging of people. Now, I worry, he's now our president, and I support him because he's going to be our president, but I don't know who is the real Donald Trump, the one who says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be dictator on day one. I'm going to deport all these people. I'll bring the army in to take care of the people I disagree with. I mean, the stuff he says, and you say, okay, well, he gets in, he won't do it. And I don't want to make a comparison with certain other leaders we've had historically, who've said all kinds of things. They just said, "Oh, they won't do this kind of thing." But that, can you still hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, because somehow I've just got some other people on this thing that aren't involved in this at all. So I don't even know what's going on here. Let me
It
see if
looks
I can get
normal to
rid of it
me.
again.
Nope. Okay. All right. Robert is having ghosts on his machine, so we'll rock the house from there. One of the things that we always have to deal with is abortion. We're constantly trying to sort out what that looks like. Oh, let me bring Robert back in so you can finish.
Am I back again?
You are back again.
Okay,
Please
so
continue your
here's
thought.
what my problem is. It's a serious problem about the managing of this great country. It's not so much even whether you agree too many tariffs, the price is going to be paid by the individual people, about how you end this war or don't end that war, and the like, or even how do you be standing on Medicare or the Obamacare and all that kind of stuff. It's what is this man in the Oval Office actually going to do and say to people, and the way he's going to act. I mean, here you have somebody. We had January 6th, just after the election, the first time the capital of the United States had been invaded since the British came in 1814, and people died. People died in that. Okay, and a lot of people have gone to prison because of what they did. And Trump has now said, I'm going to pardon them all. They were heroes. Come on. What kind of country are we living in which a guy who wants to be president can say things like that, which in another country, I can't think of another democratic country in the world who would have lasted 15 minutes in office, who didn't have a fixed term of office. So I worry, what is he going to do now when he has the button and all that kind of stuff? How much of this he said he's actually going to try to implement? All right, he now has control of the Senate. God help us if he also gets control of the House, where you won't have checks and balances. But I fear for my country that this man is going to again to be president of the United States. I really fear for my country. Now, take it in a broader perspective. One of the things is what the media did year after year of demonizing Donald Trump. I kept saying, don't do it because it's crying wolf. And then when it really comes around to where this guy is going to do the things that he says he's going to do, you can't just say, oh, that was just campaign rhetoric. That's what campaigns are all about. Campaigns are not all about that. I have never seen anybody in my entire history of being in 8 presidential campaigns. I've written speeches for more serious candidates for president than anybody else in U.S. history. Okay, so I am not just new to this thing. Somebody as disreputable as this. Okay, then you have the role of social media, in which anybody can say whatever they want without consequences, and then it gets picked up by the mainstream media, and they put it out there, and then everybody has a lot of jollies. They say, "Oh, that's just Trump doing this." Oh, the idea that the Haitians up there eating cats and dogs in someplace no eye. Oh, that's just a joke. That's just some. Come on, now wait a second. These are people we're putting into senior serious offices who've shown that they aren't capable of behaving themselves to be the level of a city councilman. Is Trump going to be a totally different person than the way he's told us, word after word, day after word, day? Here is what I am going to do. Are we going to say, oh, he's not going to do any of that. Not going to try to use the army. Not going to want to throw people out. He's not going to do all the kinds of things with his enemies list. The idea of his having an enemies list is not made up. He said so. He says it. Are we going to say, oh, well, we needed to get rid of Biden. Fine, let's get rid of Biden. We needed to have a different team in office. Let's get rid of the Democrats. Let's have the Republicans. But it's not Ronald Reagan who's running. It's not George H.W. Bush running and getting elected. It's not Dwight Eisenhower running and getting elected. It's the most disreputable person as a human being in terms of what he says and promises he's going to do than we have ever had in the history of the United States. He gets 71 million votes for a lot of reasons, but I doubt it was because I would like to have Donald Trump come into my living room and have charge of educating my children about ethics and about the greatness of this country, because what the hell kind of people would he be producing? Now, okay, he's going to be president. I want him to do the best job he can. But frankly, and I understand he got elected for a lot of things which were irrelevant to who he is. But I tremble for my country that he might actually try to do 10% of the things he's going to say to do, or that he will treat people when he's in the presidency as you have his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You have a lot of people serving the senior military. You had his former chiefs of staff, civilians, who worked for him in the White House and who said, this guy is fruitcake. How can you have this guy as president of the United States? Well, fine, he'll have the power. Maybe he will suddenly grow up. Maybe he'll have enough people who will grab him by the coattails and say, Mr. President, you can't do that. Or if he gives an order that is unlawful, as he did on the day he went to stand in front of the church, in front of the White House, poking a Bible, and he demanded that the military come out and clear the crowds. And the head military guy who was there, sworn to support the Constitution, said, I cannot do that. I have an oath of office that I cannot do what this guy had just told me. And they've gone out. The people who are most intimate working for him have come out, except the ones who want jobs or have some kind of stick or don't give a damn, like Steve Bannon, what happens to the United States of America, couldn't care less. And these people say, this guy must not be trusted with the levers of power. Now, okay, who is Donald Trump really going to be? I am frightened. I am really frightened for my country that he might be actually the person he says he is. Not other people, not that Kamala or somebody else says, oh, he's like this, but the person who says, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I believe. We have a thing down in Charlottesville in which you had this race riot. Ku Klux Klan is out there, and he says, oh, there were a lot of good people on both sides. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Doesn't even have is there no center to this man of moral responsibility or moral awareness? I have never, ever seen this on the part of Donald J. Trump.
There's a significant amount of debunking that goes into that Charlotte quote. And if you open up the quote window in time, he specifically eliminates the racist from it. Now, look, not everybody's going to agree with that, but there it is on video. So what do we do about that? If it is a false thing and that debunking is true, then that's a false perception about somebody. Who owns that responsibility?
Well, I would say there's a short term and a long term. The short term is, I hope, he will be surrounded with people of good sense and good judgment who will grab him by the coattails when he starts to do something like that. I hope people and his speechwriters will say, Mr. President, please stay on message. But because when you're in a campaign and you say, oh, it's all campaigns and all that kind of stuff, when you're president of the United States, if you were to say these things, they count with the American people and they count with foreign leaders. They count with the reputation of the United States. You can't do that. Now that's short term, okay, and that is fixable. You can always surround people with better people that can do that. I've seen that with more than one president. But then what do you do in the longer run? We've got to start doing some things we haven't done. You got to start teaching history again. Got to start teaching civics. You got to have more responsibility that is assumed by parents and by other people in society. You can't just leave it to a bunch of people, even though Donald Trump talks about the swamp. You can't just leave it to people in Washington to do things. There is, in my fear, have been a serious collapse in this country among a lot of people. I don't want to overcategorize, with a sense of taking responsibility for their families, for their communities, and for everything else. And until we wake up and say, you got to go beyond social media, maybe one of the 2 or 3 worst inventions we have had in modern history, along with the internal combustion engine, which is giving us global warming. People have to start waking up and saying, this is my country. I've got to do something for it. I've got to do something to protect my children and help them advance and help them understand the history of this country. the possibilities of this country, the responsibilities of this country. We talk about immigration and all that stuff. I see an awful lot of immigrants around the neighborhood here who work their asses off to help with the gardening, to help with the building, to help with all other things, who become citizens because they aspire not just this is a chance to do a better thing and make some money. It's because I wanted to come to a country that stands for something. And we have collectively, again, to stand for things, not say, oh, there's some immigrants out there living in the Roosevelt Hotel, or they've killed people or raped people, 1/10 of 1,000th of 1%. But who are all these other people? We could not manage the American healthcare system. We could not manage the food system, right from the picking of the crops, the growing of the crops, all the way to our table, if it weren't for immigrants. That's why you find in a lot of the border states where they absolutely depend upon people for agricultural production who want people to believe in immigration. John McCain supported immigration. So when you have somebody who demonizes, that's racism. That's bigotry. Americans have never stood since the Civil War, and some people still haven't gotten over, people who accepted the eye of bigotry as something, as an American ideal. Now, I hope Donald Trump will say to himself, okay, I did what I had to do to get elected. I got elected. Now I'm going to be a different guy, and I'm going to listen to the right people. I just hope that's so. But the responsibility for making things better over time rests with me and you two guys and families, parents, community leaders all over this country, or we're all collectively to go down. If America, we're not going to go down, but there's responsibility.
If Donald Trump's chief of staff reached out to you and said, Robert, we got a job for you, would you work for the Trump administration?
Would I work for him?
Yeah.
You give me a job with some authority. When the president calls and says, will you work for me? The answer is yes.
Right. Yeah.
If you're in a
I just think that's a rare.
That's what you do. What you do is there were people who refused to work for Trump. I know there was a senior person who was asked by the Secretary of Defense to be his deputy, and she said no. I think she was wrong. Yeah. Because when the president says, will you help me? The answer is, Mr. President, when do you want me to start?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important because we don't understand the responsibility. And you talk about civics and everything else, and just the fact that we do have these three unique founding documents that each protect a different kind of freedom and how they work together. If you don't understand how this machine works and who actually has responsibility for what part of it, it is really hard to make a good decision because the candidates will say things like, well, they can't even legally do that, whatever that thing is. And we tend to vote for these things that will be given to us, these personalities, as opposed to understanding how our machine works. I want to bring James back over to let him follow up. Anything you want to say based on what we've already covered? And then if the Trump administration got a hold of you and said, hey, we've got a job for you, it's appropriate for your level, would you take it?
Jim, if the president-elect called you up and said, I want you to work for me in a serious job, would you, like me, say yes?
Uh-oh.
Can't hear you. You're muted.
I think you're on mute. Okay, there you go. Sorry.
I would say yes, but I want to go back to immigration for a minute. We are a country of immigrants. We are strong because our families did not originate in this country. So I would, vast majority of us, and it is built on this. Reagan said in his last speech from the Oval Office, the way he said, I don't think I've ever really explained what I meant when I say that this is the way I see America. And he said he sees it with open doors. And I thought that was very interesting and very accurate, certainly to the way I think the majority of people feel and understand. Those are just the facts, that our country is great because of immigrants. That is not the problem that I have with the immigration problem. The problem is the lawlessness of illegal immigration, number one, and number two, the massive number of deaths that have resulted as a result of fentanyl coming in from these countries and killing our people. That is completely intolerable to me. And I don't understand why immigration cannot be handled in a lawful and legal way. We always had, before, we had numbers of immigrants who could come, excuse me, from different countries. I think it's offensive to the immigrants who did come to the United States and worked hard for their citizenship. I have been at and spoken at, and I find it one of the most moving things that I've ever done and ever been involved with is, and if you've never done it, Pete, I know you would be moved by it, is the ceremony when new immigrants become citizens of this country. It brings tears to your eyes. And one time, the most memorable time I went was on the lawn of Thomas Jefferson's house in Monticello. And it just brings tears to your eyes. People work hard to become citizens of this country, and they prize it. Now, the people who are coming here to destroy our culture and to hurt American people, which is a massive problem, I consider it a crime for anyone who has any responsibility as a government official to protect America and Americans to allow something like that happen. And because I feel that it's politically motivated, is it because, and this is the question I ask myself all the time, why is illegal immigration tolerated? Is it because we had always had this little saying that if Nancy Pelosi thought that these immigrants were going to vote Republican, she would have had the first shovel in the ground to build more sustainable sustainable ways of protecting the border. And what we've done in terms of not just border states to offend them in terms of not only crime and not a lot of crime and a lot of drugs, but also the cities like New York City. The hundreds of millions of dollars it's cost New York City to house these people. So it's something that, and I recognize too, that the Congress is to blame for a lot of this, for not really resolving this. But there has to be leadership, and there has to be insistent leadership. It's been a problem for decades because many Congresses, congressional bodies that the Senate and the House who have sat and tried to figure out the problem of immigration, to me, has been just as offensive as the problems that we have more recently with illegal immigration. It should have been fixed a long time ago. And the problem was that this is both Republicans and Democrats. They're both to blame for this. And I remember very well that in the case of Reagan in California, Californians were really knocking on his door constantly about allowing as much immigration as they could take. Why? Because these are businesses in California that relied on seasonal immigration. And that was a reason. And I say that was very, very much, Reagan sent a mixed message on that. And but now, to the extent that we have experienced it over the past few years, it was something that Americans find extremely troubling in terms of their tax dollars. One of the things that I have to say that if I became a member of the Congress, I would propose a law that says this: anytime that you say, I find it extremely offensive for anyone who's representing me to say, the government just gave Ukraine $10 billion. The government just gave, did this for the border. The government did this. There's no such thing as government money. You realize that, right, Pete? There is no government money. It is your money. It is my money, and it should be. I want a law that says today, if you want to say, if you want to give Ukraine, which is certainly a very important cause to me, but if you want to say we're going to give to Ukraine $10 billion, this is the taxpayers of America are giving Ukraine this. This is not, and I find it extremely offensive, and it's something that is why as I say, there is no such thing as government money. It's people
Yeah.
paying taxes, and it's their money that is being that their representatives are supposed to be deciding on their behalf whether that money is going to be spent or not. And anyway, I got off on that tangent, but it's something that I feel very strongly about. But I think
Yeah.
I think this is another one of the issues that people cannot tolerate, they can't understand. And of course, it's been dramatized. Of course, there are lies about I don't know whether the dog thing and all this sort of thing. But it's, guess what? It's kind of handed to them politically. Political people who are running campaigns, they get a little lead on something and they run with it. And you can see why. And I don't know. I do not know whether that little story was true or not. But I am saying that there is tremendous amount of frustration, especially among the families who have had children die because of fentanyl. And I'm not saying that it is the only way that fentanyl gets into this country, but there is no question. After I worked for decades on the war against youthful drug abuse and saw how many people were being killed as a result of it, this is an attack on our country. So
yeah.
Anyway, I apologize.
Let me jump in because I want to get one more topic in, sneak it in the last 10 minutes. And because
I have a couple of things to say on this, man.
Yeah. Let's have you do that.
We agree on the need to get control over immigration. I agree with that entirely, and I agree also. Thank you for Jim for saying it. Republicans and Democrats together have dropped the ball, and they can't be allowed to drop the ball anymore. Incidentally, when you talk about massive crime, I think that is exaggeration, but a lot of things are blown way out of proportion. But even one crime is too many. I agree with that. Now, with regard to the Congress, I'll just make one comment, which is on your tangential issue. We do have the best Congress that money will buy.
That's true. So I want to
clever turn on the phrase.
Yeah.
As Mark Twain said, the United States does not have a native criminal class, except the Congress.
Except for Congress, yeah. So I want to jump into abortion. There's a couple things I want to throw in there. We have modern means of controlling.
If you can speak up, I'm sorry.
Yes, I want to get into abortion real quick. We have modern means of controlling the female cycle. We have day after pills, and we have a discussion around when that decision has to be made: 6 weeks, 18 weeks, 9 months, whenever it's going to be. But we don't use language that encourages some kind of a compromise and saying this is the best we're going to do in this era of time. So is it a states' rights issue? Should the federal government be deciding? Can they even decide? Because if you say it's going to be at, let's say, 10 weeks, let's say that's the number, someone's going to say that's an abortion ban. And we go right back into the whole argument phase of this problem again. So I guess just briefly, because I don't want us to run too long, what do you think? Is this a federal issue? Is it a state issue? Is this going to be a problem with the Trump administration? What do you think, Robert?
I think it's a personal issue. One thing Bill Clinton said, abortion ought to be legal, safe, and rare. I think incidentally an awful lot of attention ought to be placed on birth control, not just on abortion. But it is a decision, I believe, that should be limited to a woman and her doctor. And if she wants to take spiritual advice, that is her business. And that the state getting involved in this, any level of state, is obscene. Now, I understand there are very strong feelings. For example, there was an effort yesterday, election day, in the state of Florida to repeal a provision that abortions were illegal in Florida after 6 weeks of fertility. And that was defeated. The repeal was defeated. Okay, that's the good people of Florida. What is a woman supposed to do if she lives around Miami and for some reason she gets pregnant? I'm not going to even discuss how that is not my business. And she has to go all the way to some other state, or she's in Oklahoma. There was some woman on the show this morning about having to leave Oklahoma in order to get an abortion and nearly died as a result. I mean, this is ludicrous. We should be, it's like a lot of issues, we should be moving beyond state intervention and let people be people and make their own moral decisions for themselves. And then go on and face on things which are criminal actions, or whether they're illegal immigrants or legal immigrants or are Native American citizens who go out and commit crimes. Let's focus on real things, not on this kind of stuff, which is used politically and by certain religious organizations to try to impose their will on the will of a woman.
James?
I think, first of all, I think that Trump is reasonable on this topic. I think he sees both sides, many sides to it. And what I've heard of his statements about it, I think have been reasonable. I think it's an almost impossible circumstance to prosecute because, and I don't mean legally, I mean to actually deal with and have any kind of unity on at all, because I can see both sides to this. And I think that there's no question that a person, a woman, should have the right to make decisions about her own body. I see that, but at the same time, I also see the predicament that basically we have a lot of people who feel that once a child is conceived, if you execute that child or bring terminus to its life, that is constituting murder. And so, my thinking is just as confused as anyone else's. I don't have any good answer for it. But I wish one thing, that there was much less. And I understand that it's an extremely toxic topic. I get that, and people have very, very strongly held views about it. But I wish that there would be more focus on child raising, child bearing, the whole process of it. I think that there should be much more discussion. There should be much more embracing young people in this whole discussion. And what are the options? What are different things? And people of all different stripes. Okay, people from all different types of communities. I think there should be more discussion, and there should be more help and counseling of women who find themselves, involved in this situation. I think they should get more help, and people should actually, because you read stories about women who have had an abortion and then they get terribly despondent because they went through that, or they're judged in this way or that way. And the only thing that I can point to is that I have a hope that if we could have more compassion and more information and more counseling, that's something I'd like to see. Otherwise, I don't have any answer. I see both sides to it, and I think it's an almost impossible predicament.
There's also three sides.
I have to add something, which is,
wait, let me say something first, and you can go. You can have the last word. There's three sides of this thing, and myself on the main screen too. We never talk about the father's side. So a father or a dude can be compelled to become a father and also denied the right to become a father. And they have no say in this in terms of the conversation. We don't even include them in the conversation, but there is a moral problem there that we're going to deny someone their right to either be a father or not be a father. And then if they were to say, hey, I was just at a party and we hooked up, I wasn't trying to become a dad, we look down on that person and say, oh, you weren't responsible. But there's responsible, that's a two-way equation. You have to have responsibility. And we never get around to that part of the thing. So there's no moral high ground. Somebody's going to have to sacrifice a right, whether it's the unborn child, fetus, whatever we're going to call it, the mom, and then the dad. We have a problem balancing that equation. All right, I'm going to shut up and let Robert talk.
No, but let me just say, I think that's a very interesting point of view that you added to that. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, the government can't compel
let me add a point, if I might.
It takes two.
Please.
Let me add a point. One also has to recognize that a significant, I don't know the numbers, number of women who find themselves in this situation are poor and then have to face the consequences economically of raising a child. I remember Jesse Jackson, who was somebody who had a way with the words, and he once said, "The problem with too many people who are against abortion, etc., they care about an individual from the moment of conception till the moment of birth, and then they forget about him."
Who? Yeah, that's so true. Let's wrap this thing up. So I guess I'll give you last word for you for right now, Robert, and then we'll come around to James, and then we'll wrap this thing. Always incredible to talk to you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out and talk with me. Robert, what do you want to say in conclusion?
Well, we've had an election. It was a free and fair election. I dreaded how things would have happened if Kamala Harris had won, because of the things that Mr. Trump and his cronies had already set up to do what they did when he lost to Biden. I'm glad the country has been spared that. And in fact, I see that there is one of the people prosecuting him who say, well, maybe we ought to forget about that. Now he's going to be president. But I say this, we have a common responsibility moving forward to help this president be a success, but also to place limits on him. That's why I hope the opposite party do keep the House of Representatives, and that we have a common responsibility to build our society for the future. I wish the campaign had come out differently. I do worry about the actual character if this person is about to be president, but I'm prepared to be pleasantly surprised, because the fate of an awful lot of people is going to depend upon that. Thank you very much for the chance to take part.
Well, they slid. James.
Well, it's always great to be with you, Pete, and to try to parse these very, very complex issues. And I'm always happy to be here with my good friend and neighbor. And as a matter of fact, when we see each other, which is every day, practically every day, if you believe it or not, we have the same kinds of conversations that we've had with you.
Love it.
Sometime, Pete, you know what, Robert? I think we should invite Pete to come and visit us, and we'll just have a good time we'll have breakfast at Robert's house and lunch at my house.
Perfect.
Right across the street. But in any case, I would just close by sharing again with everyone this statement that I like to use: what is really going on? And I maintain the position that I opened with today about what really happened in this election, and is it important to really dig into and see what the American people are looking for in terms of leadership. We've had what I call, and this is a book I'm working on now, and I'm calling it The Radical Disappearance of Leadership. And it is the question of how do you define what great leadership is, or responsible leadership. And this is something that is a tragedy in many parts of the world, lack of leadership, and very costly in terms of human life. And I think this is something that we all should kind of gather together, or even individually try to define what genuine leadership really is, and what it's composed of, who does it the best, what types of people, what kind of morals, what kind of intelligence, what kind of history. I always also refer to my favorite Churchill quote, that the further you can see in the past, the farther you can go in the future. And recently I was at a dinner with his grandson, Lord Soames, and it was a small gathering, and he was saying how, obviously that's one of Churchill's, obviously one of his more important quotes, but he was saying how important that was to him as well. And this small gathering, we were talking about the qualities of leadership. And I think it's very important, and I think to have you talked about this, Pete, the need for young people to have more civics classes, and also to have more history in their curriculum, because it is absolutely true what Churchill said. And I want our young people, I want my grandchildren, I want them to understand what the Civil War was about, what World War I was about, and the outcome and the prices that we pay from a lot of these a lot of these wars, but we need to know the history and we need to learn from them. And then we need to commit ourselves to supporting freedom and to supporting a way of life that is going to improve the lives of people who adhere to it. And that's really my great hope, is that we ask the question, what is really going on? What has really happened as a result of this election? And identify the good things that have come out of it, and then commit ourselves to pursuing those things that need to be addressed.
I love it. I'm going to say goodbye to you guys in a second. Everybody else, I'll see you later on.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for